Well, hey, welcome to the X Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Today is going to be a whole lot of fun. I have Zach back with me in the studio today.
Excited to be here.
And today is we're in new territory. We're in new waters. We're going to try a Zoom podcast, and we're going to have some fun. And the reason we're going to do that is we are bringing back on one of our guest favorites. We've had a lot of guests over the last couple of years, but this is a guest favorite, and that is my cousin, Matt. How's it going?
I'm really excited to be a favorite. I didn't know that. I'm going to put that on the resume.
You are. People have people will talk. They're like, man, I love listening to him talk. He's so smart, and I'm like, what about me? You know,
I know. Well, yeah, it's something to shoot for and aspire to, Russ.
Yeah, it's a goal of mine.
Only one of us is a published author, so that's you got that to hang your head on.
I just want to know: is there any like crazy childhood stories that you can recount, like
there
wrestling or anything like that?
There are plenty. So without divulging too much to have Russ lose his job, we used to go camping in our backyard, and there are a lot of funny stories from our camping trips. That's all I'll say.
Matt was there when I worked up my courage in 5th grade to call a girl for the first time.
So yeah, I'll tell that one really briefly. But there was a girl in 5th grade that Russ had a crush on for like a year, like all year long. It was all he ever talked about.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And he thought he got her number, but did not have the courage to call himself. So he conned me into calling.
Oh no!
And it was clearly the wrong number. It was this old lady. As I kept on asking, is Amy there? And you have the wrong number. He made me call like 20 times. Like, are you sure that you dialed it right? He would dial it in. I'm like, dude, I don't know how to tell you, but this is not the appropriate number.
The whole wait for this podcast today has been worth it for that moment.
Yeah,
right
you know
there.
what? This, I think, shows the power of when you block memories out, because honestly, I remember the first part of that story, and everything you just shared, I had completely forgotten until you painfully recounted it. So
I'm sorry to rehash.
Lydia, we're gonna have to cut all of that out. But no, it's gonna be. I think it was spring of last year you came on, and we did a couple episodes that honestly, I'm not just saying this. A ton of people were like, "Those were some of my favorite ones we've ever done." So if you missed them, you can go back and watch them from last spring. But we talked about digital media and polarization, digital media, and our souls and screens and all of that. And part of that is along with the PhD that you're in the middle of getting. Which, by the way, a couple congratulations are in order. So you tomorrow celebrate your 15-year wedding anniversary.
That's correct.
You and Alyssa do. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And you are done with all of your pre-dissertation classes for your PhD. And by the way, I guess we skipped introductions, but if you weren't here, this is my cousin Matt. We grew up together at Greenville, South Carolina. Him and his twin brother are only a month younger than me, and so we literally grew up together. Yeah. And but Matt is one of my favorite people, not just on a family friend level, but one of my favorite people to sharpen my mind against. I think a few times a year when the world just gets crazier and crazier, we get on a Zoom, and you always have a really intelligent way to look at things, and always have an approach and a perspective that I appreciate. And so
Likewise.
I appreciate it. And I figured with what you are studying, me and you offline have had a few conversations, and I just thought we need to get this on the podcast. At least most of what we talked about we'll probably never put on the podcast on our but I do think there's a couple specific topics, or at least maybe one today, that we can dive into, and that has to do with your PhD, what you are getting your PhD in. So I could not even remember the title.
Sure.
What is the title and what's the gist?
So I'm in the dissertation phase of my PhD in educational law. And as I explained to you I think a couple of days ago, that's a little bit of a misnomer. It's more of a policy degree, and that's one of those areas that, so much of.
Was there a subtitle to that? Sorry, not to interrupt, because I was listening to last year's and there was what
Well,
you
that
told
was
me.
just, those were my research interests.
Those are your research interests. Okay,
Correct.
okay. But
So,
educational law is the actual.
what you'll find is that, somebody might have, Jonathan Haidt, y'all are reading his book right now. He is a social psychologist. So, I mean, psychology is going to be what his degree is in, but his research fields are, expansive. And so, political polarization is one of them, the origins of human morality, that kind of stuff. So, you've got your degree, but then you've got your research fields that you specialize in. And so, my degree is a policy degree. The title is educational law. But really my research interests mostly entail that intersection between educational policy and digital media. My dissertation is a quantitative analysis of Google use on student overconfidence and metacognitive bias.
That's what I was thinking about over breakfast today.
I'm sure it was.
Yes,
every day.
exactly that. Yes.
No. So here's several things. One, I just want to bring you on more often because I love to pick your brain, but specifically what you're studying is one of the many hot button topics of the last few years, which is future of education. I mean, really, there's all the kind of conversations on the future of, Elon is bucking the trend now by saying, no, you can't work remote, but you have everything's been up in the air the last few years of, with how do we respond post-COVID to the new world? What's that going to look like? And so part of bringing you on is I want to talk about what you're seeing right now, where you see things going, trends that are encouraging and discouraging. But I kind of want to start somewhere that I don't want to start, but I feel like current events kind of demand us to start, which is you are in education, and one of the biggest conversations right now in the news coming out of Uvalde, and even 12 more mass shootings this past weekend alone, but specifically in schools, how you are processing the recent events, and even just not so recent events of the last 10 years that is increasing in school shootings when you think about school safety, gun safety, all the above.
Yeah, I sort of thought I might get a question on that from the woke preacher, but I'm sorry to throw that one in. I know you would appreciate that.
Moderation today is extreme.
Yeah, I know. It's wild.
Yeah, to be moderate is fringe.
It is extraordinarily difficult to be in a public school. Sort of using it as a jumping off point. You said something during, I listened to the podcast on the shootings that you guys had. I guess that was last week. And you made a comment, which I agree with in verbatim, I agree with it, but to sort of push back on the spirit of it, well, you made a comment about this is not just a school thing. This happens in churches. This happens at Walmart. This happens all over the place. And you're right. And so I don't want what follows to be in any way a detraction from that. But there is something unique and particular about school violence. And, an example that I give is that, if I walked into a Walmart and I asked the employees there, what are your concerns? Or better yet, if I asked you, how often do you worry about, violence in the workplace? An honest reckoning would render an answer of, not very often, because it doesn't happen very often. If you go to any public school teacher or administrator and you ask, how often do you give even a cursory thought to a gunman being in the school? Your likely answer is going to be every single day. I mean, I know
Yeah.
as an
Wow.
administrator, I think about it every single day. I have been personally threatened um, before. I've actually had a situation where I was at my house. This did not happen in my current district. I was at my house and a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house to inform me that they had received a credible threat against my life from a student who I had confiscated about $400 and a whole bunch of weed off of the prior day in school. And that student was up for expulsion.
I didn't know this.
That student was very upset at me and had posted on social media a picture of him with his gun in his vehicle, and he was actively looking for me, and he mentioned me by name, literally said, y'all, if you don't want to get hurt, stay away from Mr. Moore.
Wow.
So I've had that happen. I had a situation where I got a report that a student had a weapon on campus. I called the student in with our school resource officer, and we conducted a search. Didn't find anything on him. Later on that day, I'm standing in the doorway of my office. That student approaches me, and the hallways had cleared, and so he was the only student in the halls. And he's approaching me, and he's got his hand behind his back as he approaches me. To be completely honest, this is a student. I hate to say this, but this is a student who sort of fits your stereotypical profile of a shooter. I mean, he had a range of disciplinary issues, had some psycho-emotional issues, had been bullied in the past, was not quite put together, and he approached me with his hand behind my back, his back, and said, "Hey, Mr. Moore, I want to show you something." And to be frank, my heart stopped. I'm like, this is the moment. And sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's very real, like this is about to happen. I mean, I've dealt with in my.
Hey, sorry, not to break the moment because this is serious, but what was behind his back? Was it just a pair of bubble gum, or
He had a text message from a friend on his phone.
Oh, okay.
That he wanted to show me, pretty much say the person via text admitting that they had turned in a false report on him to try to get him in trouble, which, I mean, obviously that's a relief, but
right. Like, hey man, approach me different next time.
Yeah, like let's not do it that way.
Yeah. So you know very acutely the fear.
Yeah.
And I think that's good pushback. I think that's good.
Well, I mean, just to finish my thought real quick. I mean, if you are in a school, little things like, if you're a teacher, most districts, they want you to have your door locked. I've been, when I was a teacher before I became an administrator, I would occasionally get locked out of my classroom. And I locked my keys in my classroom. And every time I did that, my thought was, if there's a shooter on campus, I'm out of luck. I don't want to speak for everybody. I don't know every profession and what their internal dialogue is. But I suspect that you don't, when you lock your keys out of your office or your whatever, you're not thinking about, man, I hope there's no one gets in the building and starts shooting. That thought crossed my head every time I did that. Every time I'm on campus, I look at a door. I really hope that door is locked. I really hope that door, the locking mechanisms are working appropriately. I've handled and investigated dozens of threats on the various campuses I've been at. And so it is always on the minds of educators. And so, it is an omnipresent thought if you work at a public school, because public schools are a reflection of the problems of society in ways that a typical workplace is not. If you think about any craziness, mental illness, poverty, joblessness, you name it, abuse, neglect, public schools distill all of that into one building. It's not a typical workplace, and so it's very unique in that way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that teachers and educators have to process, and I have a little bit of a unique perspective. My wife has worked in education for the last 10 years, and even just this topic around how to best handle gun policy and different things like that. It just seems like everyone wants to put responsibility on the teachers. Hey, teachers should carry. Hey, teachers should do this different types of things, and maybe not speaking directly to gun policies, but it seems like over the last 20 years, there's been a cry that we need better educators. We need better teachers. We need more teachers who are engaged and involved in the classroom, that sort of thing. And it just seems like, from my perspective, watching my wife working in the field, that teachers, there's so much that's required of teachers. You think about the standards, the things that they have to do, and a lot of times they're funding things from their own budget and that sort of thing. What have you seen? I'm just curious from your perspective, over the last 30 years, the demands that we've kind of put on teachers in our education system.
Yeah, and you make a couple of fantastic points, and I think you're absolutely right. It is not surprising, but it is disappointing that the minute that politics becomes involved in something, that the end product ends up becoming worse, or at least more complex and convoluted. What has happened the past 2 decades is we have embarked upon this teacher accountability movement. And we've been in it so long that many people don't realize that it doesn't have to be this way, or that there was ever a time before this. But the teacher accountability movement essentially started in the late 90s at a state level, and then progressed to the federal level by the early 2000s. And the notion being that there were evaluations of teachers, but this idea that we have to rescue public education by ensuring that we have competent teachers, and we get the bad ones out, or we train them up. And literally billions of dollars have been invested in the teacher accountability movement via different evaluation instruments, training programs, professional development, et cetera. And along with that,
Oh, my wife loves professional development days. She thinks they're the best thing ever. Yes.
In-house PD days are just so, I'm sure they're edifying for her, and she gets so much out of it. But along with all of these dollars comes a litany of responsibilities, and we keep on putting more and more on teachers' plates. I mean, if you look at the things that an average teacher deals with, IEPs, individualized education plans for students with special needs, 504s, BIPs, those are behavior, modification type plans. They got to turn in lesson plans and unit plans. They're mandatory reporters for abuse, neglect, and suicide. That is law, so they can lose their certificate if they suspect someone might be undergoing any of that and they fail to report it. OSHA training, so like bloodborne pathogens, that kind of thing. They've got to work on their recertification hours. It's not a one-time deal. You got to take classes and continue to take classes. In South Carolina, I want to say it's either 30 or 60 hours every 5-year cycle. Parent contact logs to show every time, to prove that you at least attempted to contact the parents. MTSS, which is a tiered support system, because you can't treat all kids the same, and so you have to document your MTSS interventions. SEL, social emotional health, that is also one of the things that is now. So our teachers are having to have discussions with students now, and teach curriculum now on their students' social emotional health. Well, teachers aren't trained psychologists, so but we have nonetheless decided that is a role that they should serve. And then even just aside from that, and I hate to sound like an old man, like a Scooby-Doo villain, but the fact is that kids are different today. You know, technology is so good and immersive and is so engaging. And if you look at the nature of, I said this the last time I was on the podcast, if you look at the nature of what is being consumed by young people, and not just young people, but especially young people, you know, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter is 200 whatever characters or less. Everything is about brevity and efficiency. And so the upshot is that students are harder to keep engaged now. And so as such, you know, if we're going to meet students where they are instructionally, then we have to, as instructors, we got to teach different. And that means that we've got to, it's very performative. And I guess that's what
Yes.
there's a whole lot that people don't get about
Yeah.
what it's like to be a teacher, but that performative element is definitely one of
It's
them.
big. Well, and I just feel like watching my wife, she got into teaching really with this kind of stars in her eyes, like, hey, I want to make an impact in kids' lives. I want to make a difference. And then you realize when you get into it. Now, I think that's true of all professions. There's a little bit of reality kind of meets the road a little bit when you step into any profession. But I think that for her, especially in teaching, you kind of step into it like, I want to change the world. And then it's like all of these responsibilities come crashing down on you. And I just, my question is this even helping the kids? Like, are our kids getting better? Are they getting smarter? Or are they actually not?
Well, so, you know, actually, the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation poured many billions of dollars into teacher accountability initiatives. That was one of their, you know, reasons for existence the past 2 decades, and they have had to largely admit that it has not borne any fruit. The
Why do you
fact
think that is?
Well, I mean, part of it is some of the stuff I've already mentioned, which is that it is, look, we have to acknowledge a couple of things, that some things that are worth learning, there's no fun way to learn them. Some things that are
That's good.
very much, you know, I don't want to say necessary evil, but they're necessary, and it's hard to gamify them in any kind of meaningful way. Some things you just have to do the work, and it's going to actually feel like work. And one of the trends that I have personally observed with young people is they don't want to, and again, I don't want to, it's not everybody, but it is far more common now, is anything that feels like work, that isn't entertaining, that is not passive, you know, they really don't want to do. And so, you know, that's, you know, part of it. The other part of it, and again, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to throw parents under the bus, but I
Yeah.
can only report on what I observe, is that many parents believe that to be an advocate for their child, that means that they have to protect their child from any failure or
Right.
accountability.
Right.
And as such, you know, their child brings home a bad grade on a progress report or report card,
Right.
and then immediately the response is, well, what did the teacher do, or what did the teacher not do? And you know, if you look at the effects of that repeatedly over a large enough population, well, eventually, you know, kids, they're smart. I mean, they learn from cues, and they figure out that you know, this is all on the teacher. And so it's very difficult to get a student to learn when they view all experiences through the prism of entertainment.
Right.
And then also when there is little accountability put on them at home. And that's just something that I've observed, you know,
Yeah.
repeatedly.
And what you're seeing really is, like I saw with my wife, she worked in a self-contained ED classroom. for 6 years in the school, which is way longer than like the normal teacher. And she sacrificed. I mean, she'd come home with bruises on her body from these
Whole lot of
kids who were
burnout.
hitting her. Whole lot of burnout. She actually works now full time still as an intervention specialist for an online learning academy, K through 12 certified here in Ohio. But she had to get out of the active classroom, and I think in a lot of ways her view of teaching in education is jaded because of that experience and that process. And she saw a whole ton of kids just struggle. I mean, just to get through year to year. A lot of times you just kind of pass them on because you don't want to deal with them. And I really think it paints a picture that education is not going well right now. And so, we were kind of open up talking about the future of education. So I'm just curious. You see a lot of teacher burnout happening. You see this raise in the level of responsibility being placed on teacher. Where do you see education going in the future when it comes to the way we teach students, the way we kind of hold teachers accountable, the way we grade the effectiveness of our education, like when it comes to standardized testing? There's a lot there. What do you kind of see? Give me your overall picture.
Yeah. So the first thing is that, and I guess this is probably the most important, but is that I don't think your average listener or viewer is aware of the extent that teacher shortages are in the next decade going to be an epidemic.
Wow.
It's going to be a systemic major problem just being able to staff schools. People are leaving the profession in droves. So we're going to arrive at a point where we literally don't have enough teachers to
Due to burnout and low pay, pretty much.
Burnout, low pay, but also, quite frankly, a lack of respect. I mean, a whole lot of kids go home and what they hear from their family are comments about, that teacher, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And how it's a teacher's fault. Teachers are lazy or entitled, or I wish I could get summers off. And when that is what you are surrounded by, that is going to inform the attitude you have, not just about teaching, but since teachers are the mechanism for delivering education, subsequently education. And so that'd be the first thing on my radar in terms of the future. Is I will be very curious to see what states do regarding what is going to be a massive teacher shortage. I mean, I'll go ahead and tell you. I mean, we have a couple of programs in my district, instructional programs, that when our current teacher retires, it'll probably kill the program because we literally will not be able to find a teacher to fill that void. College education programs around here, it's Clemson and Anderson and so on and so forth.
Wait, how do you say Clemson? Can you teach Zach how to say Clemson?
Really depends what mood I'm in there. Inevitably a P is gonna creep in.
Clemson.
He says with a Z, a Glimson.
Clemson.
Don't do
Clemson.
that. If you're a good old boy, a P is probably going to sneak in there.
Yeah. Sorry, random non sequitur. Did you know, Matt, that Zach here met your dad?
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all, actually.
I did.
So Zach was in Greenville 3 weeks ago, stayed with my parents in their basement while they were on a cruise, and he was attending Art of Teaching and went downtown Greenville, all the haunts. And he has a funny story about how randomly one day when he walked up to take a shower, in walked your dad to feed my parents' cats. And he said it was one of the best interactions ever.
My dad, he's one of the, like he was in education for a really long time. He still substitute teaches occasionally. And he knows everybody. So that's actually not surprising at all. We can't go out anywhere. If we go out to eat, we went, this happened just literally last week, went out to eat with my parents, first time in forever. And sure enough, Mr. Moore, and I turn around thinking it's somebody for me, somebody for dad.
There you go.
So that's not really surprising.
And same with my dad. I mean, really, our family is almost all educators.
Your mother, your father, my
Mhm.
dad, even my mom was a teacher's aide for a long
There you
time.
go.
Obviously, my brother, my older brother Brad, is he was a teacher and then principal, and now he's a director of elementary education for a school district. I'm an assistant principal. My twin brother, he teaches dual credit college classes, but he does it largely at a public high school. So yeah, I mean,
So it's something that's important to
it's
us,
very, very important.
and so you have a perspective, and so you know we were talking offline yesterday, and you you said that you're not. Now you know me. Part of it's maybe personality wiring, and I do know part of it is you're seeing things I'm not seeing. I'm an eternal optimist at heart. And you told me, looking at the education, you're not feeling super optimistic at the moment. And so I know right now you're kind of describing the lay of the land of where we're currently at. But any potential, I mean, what is there any good? Are there any good signs you are seeing? And do you have any predictors for the next 5 years?
It, I guess a good jumping off point would be to point out that we don't have an education system. That is a dead giveaway to me when I hear someone talk about the American education system. That's a dead giveaway that at the best you are oversimplifying things, and at the worst you are speaking well beyond your competency and should not be speaking. Um,
Did I say system?
because you have before, it's okay. Um, the a lot of people do.
Called out. Called out.
I
We
know, man.
we have this in the United States. We have at bare minimum 50 education systems. Education is a state responsibility, and as such, you have at least 50 different education systems, and those can vary wildly from state to state. But frankly, it's even more than that because within states you have districts and
But you're
districts.
speaking nationwide, so you're speaking maybe better or be the current climate, the
Right,
current
but
condition.
but in order to, it's difficult for me to talk about the state of education and the future of education in with too broad of a brush, because as I was saying, I mean, you've got a whole bunch of different systems, and some systems are
Mm-hmm.
going to do far better than others, because some systems are going to invest in public education and they're committed to public education. They're going to fully fund their base student cost. South Carolina, where I'm at, is a state which has not fully funded our base student cost in over a decade, and just passed legislation that is going to strip public education of millions of dollars in favor of school choice and vouchers. And I don't want to get too bogged down in stuff like that. But some states are going to be really, really invested and some are not. Then other within states, you have a huge amount of variance. And so district to district is going to vary a lot. I'll give you an example policy wise. I'm in a county that actually has 5 different districts. And this is not a big county. But in my district, when we expel a kid, it's a big deal. Due process is a huge deal. And so, if a kid, we have tiers of offenses, level 1, 2, and 3, based off of their seriousness. Once a student reaches a certain threshold of level 2 or above offenses, they have to be placed on what's called a behavior contract, which the parent and the student sign, and it spells out, look, if you do X, Y, or Z, this will get you expelled. Once that student commits those offenses, then we will recommend expulsion. And then it's a recommendation because we have an independent hearing officer. And so we will schedule a day where we have an expulsion hearing and we present our, sort of like a mini day in court. We present our side, the student and their family present their side. They can call character witnesses, etc. They can provide evidence. And then the independent hearing officer, who is not affiliated with the school district, they will render their decision. If you drive 15 miles up 85, there's a district in the same county, but a different district. It's not like that. The principal says, hey, this kid is a troublemaker and, they did X, Y, Z. I want them expelled. And then it's literally just the superintendent's decision. Superintendent will call the family and the student into his office, and he's going to make it single-handedly. That's a huge variance for a really important issue that literally the delta of 15 miles makes all the difference. And so if you can imagine that difference being represented by 15 miles, imagine 1,500 miles, a million things. Funding. The district I was at in Houston, they have not had a bond referendum. And if you don't know exactly what an educational bond is, sometimes there will be temporary tax increases for particular projects, usually construction of new school facilities, et cetera. And every single time there's a bond referendum, then it gets passed. I mean, it's been decades since they had a bond referendum fail. But if you were to go to a different district, it would be a much different story. So it is difficult to speak in any kind of final way
Sure.
about trends. I am pessimistic in general because teachers are fleeing the profession. And what I see, and this is purely anecdotal, but what I see, on social media, what I hear in conversations is not a whole lot of understanding or empathy about that. It's a whole lot of they knew what they were getting into when they decided to become teachers. It's a whole lot of I wish I could get summers off. It's a whole lot of they feel like they are the clients and therefore the customer is always right kind of deal. And so as long as that is the culture and that is sort of the mindset that we are entering into the conversation with, then, quite frankly, people aren't going to want to do this.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. First, I want to go back 20 minutes really quick because it's the weird way my mind works.
Yep.
I want to close the loop. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but I just want to close the loop for my mind's sake on the conversation we started on school safety. And if you can, like 90 seconds or less, what do you think should happen? What would you like to see happen to help increase school safety?
So I'm in a school district that has had a fatal school shooting. So I've got to say that a lot of times I hear suggestions for school safety that are overwhelmingly already being done. Right. I was at my in-laws over the weekend, and they were going on. We need like electronically locking doors, and you have to be let in by somebody in the front office. You can't just open up the doors, and we need a school resource. We need a school police officer there at all times, and listing all these safety procedures. I'm like, we have all of those. We've had all of those for years. Most districts, and again, districts vary wildly, but most districts have those things. In Texas, where the shooting happened, school districts have their own police force. I worked at Fort Bend ISD, Independent School District, had their own police force. Every single school had at least one school police officer. We had three because it was a large school. A lot of the things that get brought up are things that are in place already. So it's hard to, I want to be polite. It gets very difficult to hear people who have not necessarily been in a school, don't understand how school operations work, rail about what schools should do when they don't know what schools currently do. That has not just to do with school safety, but in general, I mean, your average person doesn't know what goes on in a school and doesn't know how a school is managed or operated. And I don't want to get too.
You can go for it.
I don't want to get too because I don't want to get you.
What was a little bit of y'all's give and take?
Well, I don't want to get y'all. I don't want to get you on YouTube as the woke preacher again. Because I got a feeling that my comments might. But the fact is that when you're in a school building and you look at the population density and you look at the bell rings, the kids flood the hallways, you got 800, 900, 3,000 kids slammed into hallways, and that's a whole lot of kids with not a whole bunch of space. The details of the firearm matter, and who is wielding the firearm matters. And so I'm totally on board with making schools safer and the physical layout as safe as you possibly can. But the fact of the matter is that there is a difference. It would take 30 seconds being in a public school to know that the magazine capacity makes a difference, that the velocity of the bullet, the type of ammunition would make a difference. I'm not a gun expert. I certainly don't pretend to be. But I have a hard time taking seriously someone who tries to say that gun legislation wouldn't do anything to fix any of this. It might not be a surefire fix, but I do know this, that if I walked down the hallways of a public school in a class change, and I had a handgun, I could do some damage. I could do a whole lot more damage with an AR-15 with high capacity of ammunition. And I mean, you just take, and that's the problem, is a lot of people haven't been on a school campus in years. They forget what that looks like. If you're in a classroom, they are literally sitting ducks in rows. So I don't think you can have a conversation about school safety without talking about some common sense ways to at least regulate what kinds of firearms, what kind of magazines, what kind of ammunition is sold, and who it's sold to. To me, we can do all the other stuff, but those are some very common sense things that have to happen.
I saw. No, that's good. I was looking earlier. It takes about 2 weeks to get a passport, in like 2 minutes to get an AR-15. And even just since a lot of these massacres are happening with people that are really young in their brains, but then also emotionally are out of control. Even, I mean, this isn't a whole podcast again about, but even like a cooling off period for people, and so there's a whole lot into that, and I wasn't trying to, but from your point of view, yeah, I was just curious.
Well, I mean, so just really quickly to extend that. First off, it took me 6 weeks to get my passport. So if you can get yours too, you are really doing an awesome job. But it is interesting when you look at, I mean, a federal national gun registry seems like that would be a very common sense thing, and that is a non-starter. Apparently, I mean, I have to register my car. You know what I mean? I have to pass a proficiency test to drive and operate my vehicle. Like you said, it takes, so long to get your passport. It's not 2 weeks. If you can find someone who has gotten their passport in 2 weeks, please tell me, because I've never experienced that. But you can get AR-15 in a handful of days. And I guess my problem is that it gets framed as taking guns. I mean, but when the conversation just gets down to just regulating guns, you need to register this, you need to take a class for this, even that gets shot down. So it seems to be a little disingenuous, the objections. So.
And it's and either side, when this happens, will politicize the other side or attack the other side.
Yep.
if they come up with solutions and say, well, you're politicizing. So that's a whole other thing. But here's my question. Matthew Moore, soon to be, I guess by the end of the year, I might not be able to text you and say, what's up, Primo? What's up, cuz? It's Dr. Moore.
You must call me Dr. Primo.
Dr. Primo. Let's say that the school quote unquote system. Let's imagine let's imagine this 50 state culture of schools is a monolith for a minute.
Yep.
If it's a monolith and more money is available to pay teachers better and culture improves in their disposition and respect towards teachers, the system, quote unquote system itself, if it's a monolith, is handed to you. We're talking, let's say elementary through high school, because we've not even touched college yet. I don't even know if we'll get there. That's a lot of what I was wanting to ask you, future of even graduate and postgraduate. But let's say elementary through high school is handed to you, and you are able to scrap the whole thing and start over. Mm-hmm. Approach to education, training of teachers, approach to the future. What would you keep? What would you eliminate? What would you add?
So you started off with pay, so I guess I'll start there. I know that people don't want to hear it, but pay is huge. I hear often that teacher pay has flatlined in the past several decades, and that's not true. It's actually regressed. I pulled some numbers just for giggles, and the state of Ohio in 1990, the average teacher pay was $31,218. In order to account for inflation since that time, to achieve the same purchasing power, you would need to make $69,054. But the average pay for teachers in Ohio right now is $63,082. So there's so you actually make $6,000 less.
Wow.
Now in South Carolina, it's even worse. Ohio's done a little bit better job of boosting pay. And that holds up even if you were to take out, I mean, that is with 2022, and obviously have incredible inflation right now, but it's still bad. It's still regressed if you stop at 2021 when inflation was at still historical lows, and people will realize that the past 2 or 3 decades we've had historically low inflation. And so teachers, there in terms of actual pay and the purchasing power of their salary, it has regressed the past 2 decades significantly. And so that matters, not just out of some infantile sense of fairness, but it matters for
quality
recruitment.
of teachers coming, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm good at math, all right, I live in the state of South Carolina and I'm good at math, and we have several engineering firms around here. I mean, you can go work for Square D, you can go work for, you could go work for Michelin, you could go work for BMW. We've got a BMW plant here. There are Floor, you can go work for Floor. There are a bunch of places you could work. If I'm really good at math and I'm trying to map out my career options, and I'm like, I could go be an entry-level engineer and go make, 60, 70,000, depending on the position, $80,000 a year right out of college. Or I could go be a high school math teacher. And depending on the district, I might, make $35,000, $40,000 a year. And that's going to also come with all the things, the responsibilities, the tasks, the accountability that I mentioned earlier, and also the lack of respect that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And so it's not really a question of which one you choose. And so if you want to get the best and the brightest, and you want to be able to fully staff your schools, we have to raise teacher pay. And that'd be number one, is that in terms of recruitment and retention, we have to raise teacher pay.
And I guess what I was saying, sorry, maybe this is where you're going. I guess what I was saying, maybe to clarify, I was asking is, let's assume that you had the pay to pay teachers really well. Let's assume they're all making $80,000 a year. They probably deserve more. $80,000 a year, and respect is raised. What what you would specifically do with the school approach to education, teacher training, approach to the whole thing, what would you do?
So I would hire more teachers. Class size makes a difference. It is difficult to teach anything in any kind of engaging way when you've got 35, 40 kids in a classroom, which most states aren't there yet. But if the teacher shortage persists, which it will, then that's what you're going to be looking at. So you got to hire more. In terms of training, I think it's important that we train teachers in. I'm a big believer in accountable talk, which is a particular program, but we have to teach young people how to have high-level academic conversations. I hear from teachers a lot that, I ask students a question, they don't even know how to talk anymore. Well, we haven't given explicit training to kids on how to have conversations. We've always assumed that just they've learned it as they've grown up, but increasingly, students stare at a screen, and we've put a membrane up between ourselves, and so that empathy, reading facial expressions, social cues, body language, looking people in the eye, these are things that really have gone the way of the dinosaur. But also just the inability to express myself using evidence, the inability to express disagreement in a civil way. These are skills, and these are skills which have to be taught. And for all kinds of reasons, they're not being taught at home. And when they're not taught at home, they come with a real deficit in that soft skill on campus, and they can't have those kind of conversations. And that's important because we learn through talk. We learn through speech. It's not just a means of assessment. Talk is literally how we learn. We're social creatures. If you think about the real formative educational moments of your life, most of them came from a really in-depth conversation you had with somebody that changed your thinking or challenged you. It probably didn't come from a slideshow. It probably didn't come from a one-way lecture. It probably came from talk, from conversation, from dialogue. And so teachers need to be explicitly trained in that. I also think that we have to be more judicious about our infatuation with technology. Education, I have had education as an industry. I've had its back, this whole conversation. This is one place where I will criticize us, is we are so fascinated by what the latest and greatest is in terms of educational or instructional technology. And we just latch onto it before we even know how we want to use it. And so when, Chromebook manufacturers started to offer these massive bundle discounts for one-to-one initiatives, we can give every student a laptop or iPads. And so you've got all these districts that have Chromebooks. Every student's got a Chromebook, or every student's got an iPad, but we haven't seen any real tangible results in terms of achievement. And I believe it's because we overuse it. There has to be there's a place for them. There's all kinds of neat stuff you can do we have Clear Touches in our district, which are these gigantic, pretty much like 85-inch touch screens, which students can manipulate stuff on. And we have obviously, building wireless. Sometimes didn't work today, but we've got Chromebooks, and those are all kinds of cool stuff you can do. But unfortunately, what happens a lot is the kid enters the school building and they stare at a screen the entire day, the entire school day. Everything they do, the textbook is an e-textbook. They submit assignments online. Lecture notes are online. Instead of doing class discussions, they'll do isn't this cool? We're doing like a wall post, and we're all typing our responses. And people say that with breathlessly. Isn't that cool? I'm like, that's terrible. Like they're right there. The kid is right there. Have them talk. Um, but we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these initiatives, and so we feel like we have to use them. But the fact is that there is a whole lot of literature out there that indicates that, you need time to decompress. You need to have that ability to perform deep, linear, contemplative kind of thinking. Quiet matters. Being unplugged matters. And so I would de-emphasize the technology piece. The pushback is always, well, to be a 21st century learner, they need to be trained in this, but we're not giving them training in that. I mean, a student submitting a quiz in Schoology or some other LMS, stop pretending like you're teaching them how to code. You know what I mean? Like you posting your PowerPoint presentation in an LMS that doesn't mean that you are making good use of technological resources. So we have to train our teachers how to, in terms of the pedagogy of learning with technology, we got to train them better. But we also have to de-emphasize it. We need to tell teachers that you should have a significant chunk of time each day where your students aren't engaging with technology, where they are doing their own thinking, where talk is actual talk. They might have to actually handwrite something. They might have to read a words off of a paper page. That is really important. And then I guess the last thing I would do, there's a million things I could bring up. I guess two more things I'd say. It would be, first, standardized testing is the devil. And you don't hear me speak that brazenly about a whole lot. Standardized testing has helped to ruin a lot of public education. If you look at the most successful nations on earth in terms of education, they don't do a fraction of the standardized testing. If you look at the Nordic countries that routinely are in the top of the top of education rankings, they do very little standardized testing. And in fact, their emphasis, their obsession with achievement data, especially at the early ages, they don't do it. Early age education is about socialization, play, that kind of stuff.
The things that will actually filter into your future
Help
create you as a person.
To create you as a person. That's exactly right.
I guess part of my question was, you hit on some of, because again, I want to overqualify that first off, to age myself, it's been a long time since I was in high school. And second off, I'm not privy to what educators go through as far as training. I'm not privy to, like you said, I will proudly plead ignorance on what all is going on. But from my observation from the outside and from when I was in school, I've just wondered if, and a lot of institutions and organizations are taking 2020 through 2022 to kind of hit a reset. And so part of it is, it is a time, part of this is the eternal optimist in me of, it always starts with a vision, it always starts with a dream that seems impossible. But if we were to dream, what would it be like to reimagine education? And part of it is, what does it look like to reimagine it in terms of what people need for the future now? Some of it you said, which transcends time and era, which is, how do you learn people skills? But part of that is, especially now, because like you said, there is a growing, there's this growing culture, and I'm not picking on it because I believe in the next generation. The next generation's awesome. But through an over-attachment to digital devices, through a lack of need to socialize, eye contact, person-to-person skills and confidence, I almost wonder, like, the thing that comes top of mind that might be stupid is, if you have 6 periods, let's say middle school to high school, you have 6 periods a day. I don't know if that's what they still do or not. But if you do, would it not be good to have one of those periods, not as an elective, but as a non-negotiable, be a life skill that's going to prepare them for the future? One of them being, by everybody, what's the classic Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah.
To me, the biggest thing I wish I had in school is a freaking Dave Ramsey class. Should that not be, maybe he's a little too preachy, but a budgeting, preparing for money, learning about credit cards, how to pay your taxes, how to save. you talk a lot about digital media. Would it not be super helpful if everybody had at least at least half a year, if not a full year, on okay, not an emphasis on technology, but hey, in a world of social media and digital addiction, here's how you're handed this as an adolescent or as a growing human being. Here's how to manage it and well. Here's some practical handles on how you could prepare yourself. 1 year would be leadership, self-growth. What does it look like to John Maxwell in an early age and learn self-development and personal development and does that make sense? Like I almost wonder what are the things that would really prepare people for, or even we talk a lot about this. I mean, going back to coddling of American minds, and you kind of hit on this just a minute ago. I mean, how much of kind of the role of educators, maybe going into the future, is not just as much what to learn, but how to think.
Right.
Hey, you live in an age of polarization. You live in an age of echo chambers. You live in an age of thin thinking.
Right.
And we're gonna take your sixth period this whole year is gonna be learning how to filter and sift through information and data and think critically.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, so a lot of that I'm definitely on board with. I mean, if I could require everyone to read John Stuart Mill's, he's got a great quote that I'm going to probably butcher, so I'll just paraphrase it. He who knows only his side of the argument knows very little of that. And so, listen, I'd absolutely be on board with a lot of that. There are a whole lot of challenges with some of those ideas. For instance, in my district, we tried to start not a life skills class, but a study skills class for all incoming freshmen, because high school is different. And if I were to list all the F's for every single course, a majority of them would be for freshmen making that transition from middle school to high school. It's just different. The rigor is different. The social element is different. Teachers don't look at you as a child to the extent that they used to. We're trying to grow you into adulthood and accountability and personal responsibility, et cetera. And so, we thought it'd be great to have a class that teaches study skills and how to organize and just a curriculum that teaches you systems for organizing your efforts. Mm-hmm. The pushback from the community was significant because of GPA wars, because that's not an honors weighted course. And so,
So we need to change our scoreboard.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting conversation to have as well, is how much good does GPA and class rank actually do? Because the kids that are at the top of the top, do they need that number next to their name, whether it be GPA or class rank, to actually accomplish what they're going to accomplish? The fact is, by virtue of the fact that they would have had that number next to their name, that means they're probably going to be successful, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, their learning has clearly taken place, but I digress on that. But we ran up against a roadblock on that. So, that's not in place. There are some of the things you mentioned are taught, but again, it's difficult for me to speak with any kind of finality because I don't know every single state or district's, schedules or standards. We have a personal finance class in my district. And a lot of the stuff they do, they talk about credit and they talk about interest rates and they talk about financial health and financial literacy in this entire course. Now, it's an elective, but you have to have, in order to graduate, you have to have a certain number of electives. If we were to require, you have to be really careful as a state what you say is a requirement.
Because Dave Ramsey, they literally created a curriculum for youth, for teenagers now.
Yeah,
and I'm just thinking, I look at even from a political, whatever side you're from, our GDP, wouldn't you want every student before they graduate to have to
graduate
a class?
I would want that. I mean, I like the idea, but again, I know that this is in our hypothetical here. There are no boundaries that's a difficult exercise for me because people don't realize what we contend with in terms of political pushback, in terms of what communities will and will not accept. And so, if there's a reason why the graduation requirements are what they are. And by requirements, I mean, you have to have a certain number of credits, but then you have a core number of required classes. You must take X number of English, X number of math, so on and so forth. You are unlikely to get many things apart from that made mandatory because you are limiting students' options. They're unlikely to be honors weighted, so your high flyers are not going to want to take those. And so there's just a whole lot of, I guess, systemic pushback on those kinds of changes. I love the idea. I mean, so in a dream world, yeah. I mean, I think
So should there be more charter schools?
What I think there should be, there are charter schools that experience a significant amount of success. There are a bunch that fail. You don't hear as much about those because that doesn't pass the political litmus test. But what makes charter schools successful? What's the secret sauce? Well, it's that they have flexibility. They have flexibility. They're afforded flexibility usually. And again, state by state, this is going to vary, but they are afforded flexibility in terms of instructional program, courses, that we're not afforded. Public education, where it's just a different animal. But then also, I mean, I'll make sure I'm careful with how I say this. In public education, we don't get to pick who attends. Most charter schools are application based, even if they are public. And so, and that's honestly, and I don't want to get too much down out in the weeds for this, but that's one of my biggest problems with voucher programs is that, you're taking public dollars, but you can turn kids away. Right. So, you got a kid that is a severe behavioral program because they've got an emotional disability. Or you've got, like we have at my school, we've got a teenager who literally has to wear diapers. We don't get to say, hey, I'm sorry, we can't service you. We don't have that ability to provide educational services for you. It's hard to make apples to apples comparisons. We don't get to pick and choose who we provide public education to because public education is public education. What I would like to see is, more flexibility, not just in terms of instructional programs, but I mean, in terms of like money. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, I had a parent walk into our building and they saw all of our clear touches, which again are these really big touch screen TVs that are in every single classroom. They've got computers inbuilt into them, and so any application you want to run, you can get an 85-inch version of it, which can be manipulated on the touch screen. It's got almost limitless instructional uses. And so, but they're expensive, obviously. And so, overheard the parent talk about, I don't want to hear about, teacher pay when y'all got, 85-inch, blah, blah, blah. They come from different pots of money. I mean, first off, we have federal accountability and we have state accountability. We have federal funds. We have different pots of federal funds that are earmarked for different things. We have state funds. We have different pots of state funds, which are earmarked for different things. And so I would like to see more flexibility with how we're able to spend money. In other words, like we could fix a whole lot of problems if we could have the freedom and flexibility as districts and schools to spend in ways that we think are best for schools. I mean, I've had situations where at a campus we literally ran out of copies. We got to the end of the year, our teachers ran out of copies, not at my current school. We ran out of copies. But we had in a different account, we had $25,000 for books. We didn't need any more books. Right.
Wow. So you
But
have zero autonomy for that.
Right. And exactly. And so in terms of just funding, I think a lot of people think that, the state just gives a gigantic check and then these schools just mismanage money. That's not the case. We are told this pot of money from the feds, this can go to X, Y, and Z. And this pot of money, this can go to P, D, and Q. And we can't take from one and spend on the other. And so that lack of flexibility causes problems. If we had that kind of flexibility, it would solve a lot of issues. That'd be one thing I would, in a perfect utopia, hypothetical world, I'd like to see. The last thing I would say would be, we have gotten better at it, but we're still dealing with the ramifications of poor messaging regarding college and vocational track. And so, I don't know if you recall this, but I remember coming up through school. I always wanted to go to college, so it wasn't a big deal, but I remember starting really with my, generation, you got to go to college. This and the new economy, the only way that you're going to ever be able to make any money is if you go to college. You got to go to college, get that degree. And I've personally been a part of that as a teacher and administrator, given the company line of you got to go to college. And we make kids feel like they're a failure if they don't go to college. The problem is that that's not true. There are people that are millionaires on YouTube for making videos with their feet or all kinds of nonsense, right? There's all kinds of ways to make money, and you can invent new ways to make money.
We live in the entrepreneurial age, if we've ever been in it.
Right. And so to distill public education down to you've got to go to college is a problem, especially since, there's a significant percentage of kids who they get to high school and they realize in relatively short order that school's not for me. I don't want to go to college. I don't want to do this for 4 more years. And so if the whole point of this is to send me to college, then I'm not invested in this. And so we just lost that kid, right? That we have no relevance to their lives. And so
another indicator, we need to change the scoreboard.
Yeah, we do. And so, I would agree with that. Absolutely. We're starting to get better at that, and funding and recognizing the importance of career education. We have in our district, we have AIT, is the Anderson Institute of Technology, where, you can go and, learn how to weld, or you can everything from welding to, you be a hairdresser. We offer certifications in that. To mechatronics. We've got a great agriculture program on our campus. Auto tech. You can graduate from high school with a certificate or credential in a career field, and you don't have to go to college. You can step out of high school making 50 grand a year, and you can go live a successful life. And that's okay. It's okay to not go to college. It doesn't make you any less intelligent. I know plenty of people that went to college that I don't know how they tie their shoes in the morning. And I know plenty of people that didn't finish college or didn't go to college, or they're some of the smartest people I've ever met. And so that messaging got screwed up, and we've started to remedy that, but that's something that we need to do a better job of.
I feel like, to borrow the immortal words of John Russell Moore, I feel like there's a whole part B of the conversation when it comes to like the future of post-secondary education in college and all those things. And really, this is, for me, it's been an illuminating conversation. There's been so many things we can take apart and learn. Before we close, I just have one question I need to ask you, okay? It's a real serious question. I'm looking over your shoulder at this conversation, and I see a book on policy analysis. And that looks fascinating. But right underneath that, there's a book called The Lord of the Rings. It's a book that's a classic literary work that my good friend, your cousin, has never read before in his life, and he has promised me that by the end of this summer that he would read either Lord of the Rings or C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia.
Did I say end of the summer?
Yeah, no, into the.
I'll mail you the copy.
Yeah, please mail him a copy.
right.
You need to correct his ways. He needs to learn that these are great literary works and that he needs to onboard them into his life. We won't even talk about Harry Potter because that's on the list too. I'm trying to get
I have actually, you're going to be disappointed in me. I have never read Harry Potter.
Oh man, it must be
I
a
knew
more
you were a
thing.
wise man.
I'm sorry. I
No,
can't.
it's
a
great
trouble.
literary works.
Yeah, my kid loves my oldest son loves the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. He's obsessed with them.
There's a-
Well, Matt, you are easy to have a conversation with. I have not reached 80% of my questions yet.
I'm sorry.
So we're gonna have to. No, it's good. I want to have a further conversation because there's certain things. I'm gonna call you pessimist Patty. I'm gonna predict that with all of our human problems, the human spirit's gonna make a way. We're gonna get industrious. We're gonna get creative. We're gonna find a way forward. And there's gonna be another industry that we create a better future out of, in spite of all the obstacles. And I'm just gonna say it, and I'm gonna believe it. And I also think that the you're
I don't.
I know. I'm just gonna. This is our few, and a future podcast. I want to pick your brain on pessimism and optimism too, because there are a lot of studies out right now that show that you look at Bill Gates. Regardless of what you think about Bill Gates, eternal optimist. Did you see that him and was it Rashida Jones from The Office came out with a podcast over quarantine because she was the pessimist and he was the optimist? And he talked about the data of a lot of the people with the highest IQ usually are optimists. You're one of the few hyper intelligent people I know that is actually, I don't know if you would self-describe yourself pessimistic, but
I'm not a pessimist. I'm really not.
Go ahead and say it. I'm a realist.
I am. I see the world for what it is, unvarnished. And just again, make sure we're clear.
Let's see it for what it can be.
Bill Gates is not single-handedly, but largely responsible for the growth of the teacher accountability movement, which wasted billions of dollars and
It's a bad example.
led to the messaging that all of these problems in schools have to do with deficient teachers, which is nonsense.
No, I agree with that. But he's also solved problems overseas in Africa and with other things. There's not a Bill Gates defense. This is I was giving an example of an intelligent person. But anyways, I want to have the optimism pessimism debate. I'm believing for the future, but I think a lot of things. I think if you're listening to this, anything that can build our empathy. So if you didn't realize what was going on, the teachers are facing, this is a great conversation to raise your awareness of exactly what, as Matt would say, the school system is. I'm just kidding. What the schools, right? What the school and teachers are facing, and I just think to me, whatever, and I love kind of where you're ending at because I really want to talk about college, the future of college. I mean, right now, we've not talked about this publicly, but Zach and myself and about 5 of us, we invested in something called the Art of Communication. It's a really expensive thing that we've invested in for some of the communicators and pastors here, and we've been taking an hour each week to go through it. And it's from Earl McManus, to me, one of the world's premier communicators out in Los Angeles, and he crafted this whole thing over 2020, and it has been incredible. And so, one of the positives is we live in a day and age where if we funnel it right, we have at our fingertips some of the best training. We've got to figure out a way to get some of the best training in the best hands, compensate people well, still create environments where the important interpersonal skills are developed and interactions happen. And I'm believing we're gonna find a way forward. But shout out your teachers. Hey, shout out to all the teachers. This podcast is accessible, everywhere. But for those that listen that are part of the X, man, we just shout you out. I think coming up soon we have a teacher day coming up.
No.
Christie's Pizza. What am I thinking of?
We had Teacher Appreciation Week a couple weeks ago, and we gave away pizzas, Massey's Pizza.
Yeah. And we'll probably have something soon coming up for EXO.
Yeah,
Week,
please
for sure.
do thank a teacher. They work harder than you know.
Yeah. Teachers and I don't think we said it enough over the last few years. Teachers and nurses, they're heroes.
Yeah.
But Matt, thank you. Illuminating as always. Helpful.
I did my best. I enjoyed
you.
it, guys.
It was a lot of fun.
And just to give a teaser, this is why we need a part B. Of all the things that you were pessimistic about, the main thing that I hear people worried about in the education system is the one thing you're not worried about. And I'll just say the words Ron DeSantis and concerns about what's going to sneak into the public system. And you helped me. You kind of blew my mind about a month ago, helping me understand how policy actually happens and what school accountability actually looks like and how some of our anecdotal fears are actually not happening.
Yeah.
And but anyways,
I promise you,
Part
we're not. No one's trying to brainwash your kids one way or the other. That's all I'll say. We're not in the brainwashing business. I can assure you.
Matt, it's been amazing. Thank you, Zach. And this is probably one of our longest pods, but we really do need to do a part B before the summer's over. Let's revisit. I want to talk about graduate level education, some of the exciting things on the horizon, some of the challenges too, and what we think the future will look like. But thank you, everybody that's joined in. If you're a teacher, thank you for what you do. If you're not a teacher, text a teacher today. Tell them thank you. Buy them a gift card. Don't buy them an apple. No one likes apples. Buy them unless they're like Matt. Buy them an Apple phone, and then send them a Starbucks gift card. But hey, any questions, comments, email us always at podcast@thex.church. That's podcast@thex.church. And until next week, we'll see you then.